Founder Memo podcast, where I sit down with world-class professionals and thinkers to talk about law, technology, and entrepreneurship. My name is Stepan Khizretian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Corpora. Corpora helps startups get legal done by giving them both self-service tools to take care of the simple tasks themselves, but also keeping their lawyers in the loop to make sure that the high-stakes work is done properly and in a solid manner. Check us out at corpora.us. I'm very happy to announce our special guest for today, an amazing person and professional, Brian Liu. I'm going to read out Brian's awesome bio, and then we'll kick it off. Brian is the founder of LegalZoom.com. He served as CEO of the company for the first 7 years and remained as chairman of the board until 2018. Now he's on to his next legal tech venture, Overture.law, an attorney-to-attorney referral platform that aims to become the Ticketmaster of law, which I think sounds awesome. Brian, thank you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that really nice intro, Stephen. I'm really glad to be here.
Amazing. Let's kick it off. Brian, I've known you long before we've actually met in person as a legal tech enthusiast myself and as an attorney. And you're a legal tech pioneer in the true sense of the word, right? You founded LegalZoom about a quarter century ago, 25 years ago. Today, it's one of the most best known, one of the most well-known brands in legal tech around the world. You're since building Overture.law, you're building BizCounsel. How has the legal tech scene changed over this past quarter century? This was turn of the millennium you started. Now we're 25 years in. What's changed?
It's a completely different world. It's changed so immensely. I think when we started, you can forget, just legal tech companies, counting on my, fingers how many there were in the United States. Even where I live right now in Los Angeles, that the technology scene was almost non-existent when we started, in about the year 2000. Right now, nobody, when we started, of course, nobody understood what legal tech was. Nobody wanted it to give us any funding. And now it's like an incredibly hot space. I just went to a conference, in fact, in the UK of all places, went late last year. There were 2,500 people in the UK with lines out the door trying to attend a legal tech conference. That's incredible. I don't think you could have gotten 5 people in any place to attend any legal tech conference 20 something years ago, 25 years ago. So the interest, the level of interest, the idea that people who graduate law school now are actively thinking about legal tech as a career instead of jumping into a law firm, all that has changed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's a brand new world, and it is pretty exciting.
And I'm curious, when you were starting LegalZoom at the turn of the millennium, when you pitched the concept of legal tech, you mentioned that people were unaware of this, probably got some blank stares. How did you explain it, and what were their arguments for and against legal tech? I'm curious how that conversation looked like.
Well, so what I would tell people is that, look, the market for legal services is huge. And just like today, there's a huge gap in services. You have attorneys who are very expensive and they're very good at what they do, but they charge hundreds of dollars by the hour. And in fact, it's not that much different even right now today. And then on the other side, you have, at that time, self-help books and literally forms you can buy at office supply stores for like last wills or maybe a form to start a corporation. Then they would give you a book with a step-by-step guide of where to mail this form, right? How much money to put in, write a check for X, and then you would get something back in the mail. So in between, there was nothing. And we saw what was going on with everything from online stock trading, online tax preparation. And we said, why can't we simplify the process for these types of routine legal documents and do that for law in the same way that they did it for tax preparation? And that's really how we came up with the idea of LegalZoom. And that was kind of like the genesis of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you mentioned UK, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts about countries and jurisdictions and how they fare in the legal tech space. To my mind, and curious to know your thoughts as well, UK is one of the leaders in this space. Like they pave the path when it comes to alternative business structures or
Yep.
legal tech technology. And with them, other Commonwealth jurisdictions such as Canada and Australia. And US
Yep.
is really behind in that sense. What are your thoughts about this?
I mean, it's absolutely true, and I think a lot of it in the U.S. stems from two things. It's one, the rigorous process it takes to pass the bar, and two, the fact that they make it it's a graduate school. You've got to graduate from undergrad, and then you've got to go to 3 years of law school. In most of the rest of the world, a law degree is simply a major in college, and so that's true of the UK. So you don't get the sense of this whole, I guess, a protectionist, like almost a little secret society group that you've got to join. It's much easier to graduate with a law degree in a lot of these countries, and then I think because they from there they make it more accessible and easy to be a lawyer. They think about, okay, how do we use the law in ways that benefit society, as opposed to, I think, a lot of times, the complexities and everything that happens here. It seems like a lot of times the legal system is meant just to benefit the lawyers.
Yeah, yeah. At times, I got that impression as well. And lots of vested interest too, and a sensitive
Yeah,
field, right, to navigate as we try to have a more robust legal tech scene in the U.S. here, given our
yeah.
history, as you mentioned, and the way we do things.
I mean, in the UK, I'm involved with actually an organization called LawTech UK. And what's really interesting is that they are a joint venture between private industry and public.
Hmm.
So the Ministry of Justice, which is kind of like the Department of Justice here in the US, they are partners and they actually fund this. So they are actively looking for ways to bring greater access to people in the UK. And their other ulterior motive is that they want, with they believe that having a really good, strong legal system that's efficient, it will entice more businesses to set up offices and maybe their headquarters in the UK, because they're competing with other countries in Europe and other countries throughout the world.
Let's talk about access to justice because you yourself mentioned it earlier in terms of LegalZoom. The gap between what people, the legal services people actually need and what they can afford is astonishing. And access to justice has been a theme, a recurring theme over the past years, but it seems like that gap isn't narrowing, isn't close to narrowing. And the way I see it, and you sort of validated this yourself just now, LegalZoom, BizCounsel, Overture.law have this underlying solid theme of access to justice. What are your thoughts about this? How should we as a society, the US legal system, how should we think about it? And what should we do as stakeholders to make access to justice a more vibrant theme and the problem that I mentioned a less of an acute one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of people think about access to justice as in, oh, we need more lawyers. Oh, we need lawyers to do pro bono work to, essentially help people who can't afford it. And that's not the way I look at it at all. You know, Stephen, I see, like, in fact, I really don't like the term access to justice because it implies a lot of this idea that there's some sort of social justice or that there's something unequal. And I don't think that's it. I think the system itself, the legal system, is really, really complicated and they've overcomplicated a lot of things. And if we can cut through some of that red tape, if we can make it easier, I think it opens it up so that more people can access the benefits of the law. Because the law is really meant to protect everybody. I don't think the law is just there so that people who can afford high priced lawyers get whatever they somehow get a higher level of service. I mean, it really should be there to protect people equally, and it should apply to everybody equally.
Mhm.
So for me, it's it is about the complexities of the systems, and then how can we get more people to essentially utilize, how can we make it affect more people like equally.
So it sounds like the efforts that have been applied previously, such as pro bono work or getting more lawyers, act as a band-aid as opposed to going to the root cause being the complexity of the system. And I think that's a hallmark of not only the legal justice system, but the healthcare system, for example, and a lot of other systems in this country, which probably comes with 250 years of sovereignty. When that happens, you have a lot of regulation upon regulation upon regulation, and then you have what you have. And then the question becomes, how do we start peeling back these regulations without affecting the core reason they were put there in the first place? So in this case, we're coming to protecting society from charlatans, from people who proclaim to practice law but are not duly qualified to practice law. So
Yeah.
the delicate balancing act there.
Yeah. I mean, there's, again, you look at other industries. I mean, I think the medical profession, I mean, there's a bunch of licensing, of course. And of course, people are doing things that's going to, affect your life and affect your health. And that's pretty important. I mean, you definitely want somebody who knows what they're talking about and knows what they're doing. And I think, it's important that a lawyer knows what they're doing, but it's not life or death. You know, it's really not. Here's this. I mean, preparing your taxes. Okay, that's important. It's very important that you get that right. And in fact, if you don't get it right, there's a lot of consequences, and it could be pretty negative. I mean, it could really affect a lot of things badly for you. But you don't have to have a special license to be an income tax preparer. You don't. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's no special qualification. I mean, if you ever go to H&R Block, you can go there and take H&R Block University and become a tax preparer. And the law is such that it is complicated in so many different ways. And just because I can be licensed and I understand one part of the law, I might not and probably am not qualified in doing something else. I mean, if I'm a tax expert, I'm not going to understand how to do family law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's things like malpractice, and I think that ultimately is really important. And that's maybe, even more important than licensing. It's like if you make a mistake, hey, there's repercussions if you make a mistake, so don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe having bonds and other things like that. That to me is the ultimate, like that's like the not just a guideline, but that will tell people, hey, look, you're entering into a dangerous area. Please proceed and tread carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, here's another example. I'll just pull this out, which is, being an orthodontist. There's a specialization that the dentist can do to be a orthodontist, but actually any dentist can do, put on braces. They can all do that stuff if they wanted to. They're just held to the same standard as an actual orthodontist if they do it. But it doesn't preclude them. Their license is the same. It just means that they are held to a different level of specialization. And I think, you could do the same without going through all the licensing requirements that people have, and you can create different levels of what you can do within the law, as opposed to like there's this one size fit all degree that everybody has to get, and then only if you get that you're qualified.
That's a great insight, Brian. And what I hear you saying, and let me know if I'm following, is we sort of discriminate between different functions of the practice of law, different areas of the
Yeah,
practice of law, sort of putting them on a spectrum of potentially fatal, or if not literally fatal, then having drastic, irreversible consequences for someone's fate,
yep,
to one of the mill routine stuff that probably can be automated, that probably no human can do, and having separate levels of qualifications, if you may, or
yeah,
liberating a part of that altogether without any qualification in order to go to the root cause of the justice problem that we're facing.
yeah. I mean, that sounds about right. And look, I mean, you were a corporate law person, you were a big law guy, right? I was too.
Not big law.
And
I never did.
what's that?
I never did
Ah, you never did it.
my own.
See, here, look. One thing I never did, I'll tell you, I never did litigation. I never once stepped into a courtroom, right? And I don't feel like I'm even close to being qualified to doing any of that stuff, to advocate for somebody in court. Yet I have a license to do it. And it doesn't really make sense. why we like the schooling and the education, I think is really important because you kind of teach somebody all these basic skills, but it doesn't get you anywhere. It really doesn't. What they really should do is create more specializations and specialties because, you know, doing corporate transactional work, quite honestly, like the work I was doing, I don't think I had nothing that I took in 3 years of law school prepared me for my first year on the job.
Mm.
Nothing, you know? It's completely different. So why did I need to go through those 3 years of law school? If I could have taken a separate course, or if graduating from college, I could have like essentially, worked as immediately at that firm and trained into doing those exact things, I'd be so much better off. And you would have more people who would be able to do that.
Hmm.
Let's say, simple parts of family law, for example, or, you don't need, I think, somebody who went through all the rest of law school. I don't even think at UCLA they offered a course on family law. Yet it's one of the most important things. That's not what they teach you.
True, true. And continuing this train of thought, continuing the topic, let's talk about alternative business structures, which personally I'm very excited about. Couple of years ago, a few years ago, two U.S. states, Arizona and Utah, enacted alternative business structures. And simply for our viewers who might not be familiar with the concept, alternative business structures allow those who are not qualified to practice law, who are not lawyers, to participate in law firms, to the management and ownership of law firms, which in other jurisdictions is banned. Right, only lawyers can own and manage law firms. Um,
Yep.
we talked about UK earlier. This has been law of the land in the UK for almost 2 decades now, and the US is just catching up. What role do you think such structures would play? First of all, do you welcome this development in the US? And I think LegalZoom was instrumental in adopting ABS in Arizona. Correct me if I'm wrong. But how do you see the ABS as a potential solution, one of many solutions to the access to justice problem?
I mean, I think in general, I think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a cure-all. I don't definitely don't think it's a cure-all. But what it does is it sheds the light onto this issue, and saying, hey, look, we need some sort of external factors to help push things along in this legal profession. We can't just rely on lawyers to try to, make things better. We need some outside third party ideas. But in and of itself, just because you've got, business people who can invest in a law firm, or private equity or anybody else, I don't think that, honestly, I don't. I mean, it's a double-edged sword because the outside people who invest are just looking for a profit. They don't really have anything in terms of vested interest in, refining or redefining and democratizing the justice system. They don't have any skin in that game. They're just looking for a profit. Um, so, like I said, that's why I think overall it's positive, but there's other things that can and should be done.
There is that problem for sure that those who are not trained in the trade of law might simply care about their profits and not the essence of the practice of law. On the flip side,
Yep.
if the structure is properly set up, where the business is ultimately managed by a lawyer, someone who understands and appreciates the importance of rights and justice, then a
Hmm.
very robust balance might be struck there. I'm excited about it because oftentimes what I've seen is lawyers being too head down in the delivery of legal services and not being too
Yep.
open towards innovating in that space, simply as a matter
Right.
of being busy. But if we can join those forces of lawyers providing the essence of the work, whereas those who are savvy in marketing and management bring the innovative part of it, we might have a win-win there. And we both
Yeah.
know about the examples of ClearSpire back in 2000s and Atrium after that, who tried to innovate with
Yeah.
the two company model, and that ultimately failed. And I wonder if
Yeah.
the entry of ABS is in the scene, we might have leaner companies because they'll have to
I would.
generate that
I
to
would
a firm model.
look. I would hope so. And just as a counterpoint here, I was recently, there's arbitration now, right?
Mhm.
And so instead of going into the courts, there's private arbitration. It's written into a lot of contracts. And the idea is that it's supposed to be more efficient and faster than going to the courts. That's the idea behind it. the reality behind it is it's not always that way. In fact, a lot of times it becomes, a private court is kind of like a private jail in some way in terms of the political footballs and some of the other things that can go on. It's not a cure-all.
Brian, you talked about having different levels of qualifications for various types of legal activity, and that brought to mind a petition that recently was launched by Olga Mack of Above the Law and spearheaded by Damien Real, that calls upon the American Bar Association to drop the term non-lawyer. The concept being that it's a very divisive one, it's a demotivating one, it's very anachronistic, because essentially anyone who is not a lawyer, be it a clerk, a paralegal, legal assistant, data worker, data scientist, so on, they're all bundled into this category of non-lawyer. The concept is if
Yeah.
we can label each person as they should be labeled and give credit where credit is due, it'll result into a more motivated, a better acknowledged system, which eventually will trickle into targeting the justice gap. Your thoughts about this?
Leave it to the lawyers to always, I mean, come up with all these terms, right? Having practiced law before, they love the word non. You know, just imagine if we use the word for everything. It's like, non-licensed, non-doctor, non-accountant, non-architect, non-American, non-Californian. It's silly. I mean, yeah, and I do think that semantics matter because it changes the way you look and think about things. And yeah, I've read that petition. I think they are right because they really like, now that it's always obviously written by lawyers because now we are lawyers and everybody is a non-lawyer. And so they're the others. And so they're never as good as we are. And yeah, I think it makes sense because, in order to, again, just like what we were talking about with the ABSs, you've got to make little inroads to get them to change their minds, right?
Mhm.
Because the lawyers and the people who are entrenched in the profession who are making the rules, they really are entrenched in their ways of thinking. And you kind of have to break off little pieces and you have to, try to take off little chunks of that wall from the edges.
Yep.
And then hopefully they can see, okay, look, you know, this is the bigger problem. This is what we need to address. By
Mhm.
the way, I would love to come up with new way of a new term for access to justice in the same way.
Brian, talking about justice gap or whichever other term that we come up with during this call or afterwards, alternative business structures, jettisoning the term non-lawyer. I think a lot of our viewers will be thinking about another phrase, the unauthorized practice of law. So we sort of
Hmm.
touched upon this at the top when we're talking about legal tech. Um, but there is a reason why things are done in a certain way, right? There's client
Yeah.
confidentiality, people's fates are at stake. You want to make sure that
Yep.
legal system being as complex as it is, we want someone who's a professional to help society to navigate those
Yeah.
complexities. How do these concepts coexist? How can we move towards better access to justice, less of a justice gap, incorporate alternative business structures, jettison the word non-lawyer without moving away from the reason why this was done in the first
Yeah.
place, without engaging in the unauthorized practice of law?
The toughest thing is that people try to make this a bright line rule, and there is no such thing, right? What is the unauthorized practice of law? And that has changed over the years based on so many different things, including technology, of which, of course, AI is going to be the most important here. You know, I it's hard to define what is the unauthorized practice of law. And if you look at a lot of the definitions, it's a state by state thing, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And the best definition I've ever seen, by the way, is what I mean by best. I mean that in a kind of like a ironic sort of way.
Tongue in cheek, yeah.
The practice of law is the things that lawyers have traditionally always done. Therefore, the unauthorized practice of law is doing anything that lawyers have traditionally done. And I'm not kidding you, on the laws of more than a few states, that is how it's defined. It's amazing. And so, that, of course, as you know, has changed. I mean, and one way you would say unauthorized practice law is understanding the law, but applying that, well, I should say the practice of law is knowing what the law is and then applying it to a person's specific situation,
Yep. Yep.
right? But I can tell you right now, you go to any AI chatbot, and that's exactly what they will do. And they'll do it pretty well. And there's different levels of it, of course, because there's different levels of complexity. And you might have a very simple question. Um, and you might have, versus something that's much more complex with, numerous legal issues. I could say that, I have a relative who is, okay, choosing a form, the proper form has always been seen as the practice of law. But if I ask ChatGPT, what type of document do I need to say that, if I go into a hospital and, something happens to me that's like almost like a do not resuscitate form, and can you help me fill it out? They're going to tell you exactly what it is. They'll give you the form and they'll do it for you. Now, is that practicing law? I don't know. And it's not that much different because remember, one of the things was that at one time, a judge had ruled that software, just truly back in the old days, like a CD-ROM program of software to create a will, that was a practice of law. In Texas, actually, was where that was decided.
Really?
They never changed that rule. They never changed the definition of the practice law. They just created an exception for software. And the successful argument was that all you're doing is taking a self-help book, which is actually protected by a Supreme Court case, that is not the practice of law, just writing a book. Believe it or not, that case went to the Supreme Court. Think about that.
Wow.
And then they said software is simply an extension of that. You're just all the rules you wrote down in the book, you put it embedded into a software program. Well, there's not that big of a step between that software program and AI. And so I'll tell you, I mean, I struggle with it, and I'm not sure exactly where that line should be,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there is, to me, and England does this very well. They have different professions, which is a solicitor, which helps with general things about the law. And then you have to be a special barrister if you want to represent somebody in court. And there, I think that makes sense. If you want to represent somebody in court, you should be licensed. You really should know what you're doing. Okay, that I don't. I mean, maybe at one point I'm going to get an AI bot or my app that's going to do everything for me. Judges are pretty against that.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
seen a lot
Recent
of
cases.
court cases where they've thrown out judgments and thrown out fees for any briefs that's been written by AI. I don't think that's going to survive. I don't think that's going to last. I think that's going to be here to stay in the legal profession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's going to be even more discussion as to what we do there. And I think that there is, again, not a bright line test, and it's going to be dependent on the situation. It's going to be a situational thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in the end, most importantly, I really believe this, whether somebody is hurt or not, whether somebody was damaged, I think if you create a system where, maybe it's a more general, maybe it's a more open rule and give people more leeway, but you create bigger punishments for somebody who does it wrong, that will self-govern itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that
Regulation.
that makes a lot of sense. And what I sense you doing here, Brian, and the following phrase comes to mind: first principles. Like, let's go down to first principles. Let's understand why we are doing what we are doing, and drawing
Yeah,
that line there. Is somebody hurt? At the end of the day, the reason why we are regulating the practice of law is to make sure that people don't get hurt. And,
right.
and a lot of things that are done in this society are kind of laissez-faire, with very draconian penalties if you make a violation, if you commit
Yeah.
fraud or misrepresentation. But there's no active police that is keeping you from making that
Yeah.
step. You're only punished if that step is a misstep deliberately.
Yeah.
So, and coming to your example of the self book being turned into a CD-ROM, being turned into AI, again that goes to first principles. Like we can't simply rule out AI just because it's a variation of the practice of law in some jurisdictions because it's maybe no more than
Yeah.
just self-help books. And another example that came to mind that was by the way shared by Damian Real at the TLTF summit last year was how various types of technology were incorporated into practice of law over the decades. First off,
Mm.
came email, and lawyers were very reluctant of using email, saying, "I don't want this confidential information going through certain unknown channels into certain unknown servers and being potentially seen by people who aren't part of the law firm team." But lo and behold, email was adopted, and then came cloud servers. Lawyers were initially reluctant to adopt cloud servers because
Mm.
on-prem servers were the thing, and again, issue of client confidentiality, issue of unauthorized practice of law. But lo and behold, cloud servers became a thing, and now we have the
Yeah.
same with AI. There's this pushback against AI, but we can't simply blankly write off AI
Yeah.
entirely as something that is harmful without really
Yeah.
going to the first principles in terms of,
Yeah.
is there harm being done? Is there in fact an authorized practice of law?
That's right. And if you start at first principles, was there harm? Then you can expand from there, which is what's the likelihood that somebody could be harmed in this particular situation or in these class of services, right? And I think litigation is one of these areas where, okay, the likelihood is pretty high, the complexity is high. Therefore, you're going to have a higher barrier in terms of who can practice and do those things in litigation. And maybe there's another area where, let's just say, let's take estate planning, and you can divide that up into subsects, right? Which is, let's say somebody who has, either children or millions of dollars at stake. Hopefully, they will know that the stakes are higher, and they're going to hire somebody who is a little bit more knowledgeable. But if you don't really have a lot of assets and you've got some, pretty simple plan, I'm not sure if you need a, $500 an hour lawyer to draft a will for you. I just don't know if it's necessary. And so maybe again, depending on the situations, and look, we know that small claims, I talk about litigation, but small claims, things that are $5,000 or under, you can't even have a lawyer in a small claims court. So we need to create different levels and different situations where there are different procedures. And then that's how you can address this issue of people feeling that, okay, this was fair, this was efficient, and I felt like, okay, the system works for me.
That makes a ton of sense. You mentioned the UK example of barrister solicitor. In a lot of civil law countries in continental Europe, primarily Eastern Europe, in my home country of Armenia, there are certain types of legal services where you need not have a law license to practice.
Yeah.
Drafting of simple contracts, for example. And again,
Right.
controlled again is going to court. Like if you want to go to court, if you want to represent a client in court, that's where you
Exactly.
definitely need to have a license in order to do that.
I think
That the stakes are so high.
that I was going to say contracts because usually contracts are a business relationship, and especially if it's a business contract. And as a business person, you should be able to figure out, do I want to go through the expense of hiring a lawyer to make sure this is right, or am I just going to risk it? It's the same way. Do I buy insurance or do I not?
Yeah.
It's a business decision. And you can then decide whether you want to, be more secure by hiring a very expensive lawyer, or if you're a small business and you want some sort of minimal protection, you can hire somebody a lot less expensive, or maybe you can, create the contract on an AI chatbot. And that's okay. Fundamentally, it is your decision as a business person.
Yeah, yeah. As a sophisticated business person who understands the risks involved.
Yeah.
You know what came to mind? Black letter contract law, where Sue sells apples and John buys the apples by just a handshake and a wink. We go from that to having tens of pages of contracts to document a business
Yeah.
relationship. And at the core, the question is who really wins as a result of this sophistication?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you're buying a business for multi millions of dollars, and you're going to want somebody, not just a lawyer, but you're actually going to want an investment banker to really walk you through it, understand the terms, understand what can be done to protect yourself in a lot of different situations there. You're Look, you're just buying buying a couple apples. You're buying, I don't know, whatever else. I don't know what things you need.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Brian, you broached the topic of AI, and I want to go back full circle. We talked
Okay.
about the past 25 years of legal tech evolution and how it evolved. Let's now try to sort of foresee what it's going to look like the next 25 years with the advent of AI and other advanced technologies. What are your thoughts about this?
I can tell you, I don't know what is going to happen. I wish I could tell you. I just, fundamental things I know is like AI is game changing, and it's going to be game changing to the legal marketplace and the legal profession more than, you know, more than a lot of other industries and areas. They're going to fight it. The lawyers are going to fight it. They definitely are. Uh, but I'll tell you, 25 years from now, the profession will change. The tools that they use will change. But I guess I'm a little bit of a pessimist in some way. I think we're still going to have this justice gap. We're still going to have problems with quote access to justice. We're still going to be talking about some of this stuff that we can still work on because it's not a silver bullet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I want to also touch upon Overture.law, if you'd like. Is AI a part of Overture.law, or do you see it as part of the roadmap?
It's funny. We definitely use AI in our matching technologies, but fundamentally, what Overture is, and this is a speech that I give to a lot, which is in the legal practice and in so much of life, humans still matter. Human relationships now in the age of AI matter more than ever. And so, what Overture does, it's about creating tighter relationships, building social networks, and allowing you to actually get closer to your clients. Because sometime this is what I do believe in 25 years. You're not really going to know the difference between a contract drafted by somebody who went to Harvard Law School, who has 20 years of experience at the best law firm, or somebody who just graduated from some other place, a small unaccredited law school, and they just graduated and they can write a contract that is just as good using AI.
Yeah, yeah.
I really think that's going to happen.
I see that happening as well, and I relate to your point of at the core, the practice of law and various activities that you and I are involved in. It's a human endeavor.
Yes.
Humans are important. Emotions
Yes.
are important. Law is a very human endeavor, and so the
Yeah.
essence will largely remain unchanged, whereas the shapes in which it is packaged in will probably change.
Right. Right. And I hope what happens, by the way, with AI is it helps us all realize that these human relationships are so important so that it gives us more time to focus on that. And instead of us doing essentially robotic computer tasks with our time, we spend more time to develop relationships.
And on that point, Brian, I want to say that I genuinely enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to continuing it off screen as well.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. That was great.
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today was Brian Liu, co-founder of LegalZoom. See you next time.
See you.
That's a wrap.